Mythweaver, can you please point me towards some indie comics or anything outside Marvel and DC? I'm honestly sick and tired of the nonsense those two keep putting out.
Don't worry, because today I've brought you a comic that shows us a different kind of superheroes. One where the writers truly put the heart into the characters and respect the readers, instead of chasing cheap drama. Have you ever come across a comic called Black Hammer? Honestly, this one's a hidden gem that way too many people are sleeping on. Trust me, it deserves way more recognition than it gets. So, without wasting any more time, let me open your eyes to this amazing comic. So, Black Hammer is one of those comics that sneaks up on you. At first glance, you think it's just another superhero story with capes, powers, and all the tropes we've seen before. But once you get into it, you realize it's actually something way deeper. It's about identity, regrets, and what happens when heroes outlive their purpose. It's less about saving the world and more about how people deal with being forgotten, isolated, and stuck in lives they never asked for. The plot kicks off with a pretty heavy idea. A group of superheroes save the universe in this massive, reality-shattering battle. It's their biggest victory, the kind of thing that should cement them as legends forever. But the twist? Right after that, they vanish from the world and end up trapped in this strange, rural town that no one can leave. The town itself is ordinary on the surface: diners, farms, small-town people, but for the heroes, it's basically a prison. They try to escape, but something always stops them. And to make things worse, the outside world doesn't even remember they existed. Their sacrifice didn't make them icons, it erased them completely. From there, the series is about how each of these characters deals with being stuck in this quiet, suffocating life. You've got these larger-than-life figures who once fought gods, cosmic beings, and monsters, now forced to pretend they're just average townsfolk. It's tragic, sometimes funny, but also unsettling because you can feel the tension building. They're not meant for this kind of life. Now, the characters are the soul of the book. Jeff Lemire didn't use Marvel or DC heroes, but you can tell who inspired them. He takes those familiar archetypes and twists them to explore very human struggles. Abraham Slam is basically their stand-in for Captain America, except he doesn't have super soldier serum, and he's aged into an old man. In the town, he's taken on this fatherly, almost farmer role, but inside, he's wrestling with irrelevance. He's a guy who once led a team of gods and aliens, now reduced to fixing fences and keeping the peace. He's proud, but you can see how much it eats at him that his glory days are gone. Golden Gale is one of the most unique and heartbreaking characters. Imagine Shazam, but reversed. She's actually a woman in her 50s, but whenever she transforms, she's stuck in the body of a 9-year-old girl. And because they're trapped, she can't change back. So, she's living her life as a bitter, chain-smoking, foul-mouthed kid, while inside she's still an adult with decades of experience. People treat her like a child, and it drives her insane. It's funny in a dark way, but also sad, because you can feel the weight of her frustration every time she's on the page. Colonel Weird is the cosmic explorer of the group, clearly inspired by characters like Adam Strange or even Doctor Strange. But unlike those guys, he's completely messed up by what he's seen. He's been exposed to so many different timelines, dimensions, and cosmic truths that he's basically living half in reality and half outside of it. He'll just wander off mid-sentence, muttering about things no one else understands. He's broken, but also kind of wise in this eerie, unsettling way. Every time he shows up, you know you're about to get some cryptic piece of the bigger mystery. Barbalian is their Martian manhunter figure, but his story is much more personal. He's an alien warrior who got exiled from his people because he's gay. That rejection has defined him, and when he came to Earth, he didn't find acceptance there either. So he's stuck in this cycle of being this fierce, powerful figure on the outside, while inside he's incredibly lonely and searching for a place where he belongs. His story adds a lot of heart and representation that superhero comics often miss. Madame Dragonfly brings in the horror element. She lives in a creepy, haunted cabin that feels like it belongs in an old EC horror comic. She's mysterious, tied to dark magic, and carries this tragic past that makes her feel like she's always half in mourning. She's not as openly broken as the others, but there's this constant sense of dread around her, like she knows something the rest of them don't. And hanging over all of them is Black Hammer himself. He was their big powerhouse hero, the one whose sacrifice was tied to the reason they're stuck in this town. His presence is everywhere, even though he's gone. His daughter eventually enters the story, which opens up a whole new layer. But his absence really defines the team. He's like the ghost of their glory days. The beauty of Black Hammer is how it balances the small-town drama with the bigger superhero mythos. On one page, you've got these heroes bickering over dinner like a dysfunctional family, and on the next, you're learning about their epic past battles against cosmic villains and gods. That push and pull between the mundane and the extraordinary is what makes the story so gripping. It asks this question: who are these people when the world doesn't need them anymore? The art style by Dean Ormston helps drive that home. It's not glossy or flashy like Marvel and DC books. It's rough, almost eerie, with this grounded feel that makes the farm and the town feel claustrophobic. The contrast between their colorful superhero pasts and the dull, earthy tones of the town adds to the atmosphere of being trapped. As the story unfolds, you start to see more of the mystery, why they're stuck there, what really happened to Black Hammer, and whether escape is even possible. It's not just a character study, there's a central mystery pulling everything together. What makes the series worth exploring is that it doesn't just stop at the main story. Lemire expanded it into this whole Black Hammer universe with spin-offs like Sherlock Frankenstein, Dr. Star, Skulldigger, and more. Each of those books dives into side characters and builds out the world, giving it the feel of a fully fleshed-out superhero universe, but one that isn't owned by Marvel or DC. It's original, but still plays with all the history and tropes longtime fans love. In terms of popularity, Black Hammer got a ton of critical praise. It even won the Eisner Award, which is like the Oscars of comics. But it's not a household name like Spider-Man or Batman, which kind of works in its favor. It feels like a hidden gem, the kind of series comic fans recommend to each other when they're tired of the same old Marvel-DC formula. So if you're into stories that mix superhero nostalgia with something darker and more introspective, Black Hammer is perfect. It's about legends who can't go home, who've been erased from history, and who are now just struggling to find meaning in lives they never chose. It's tragic, it's heartfelt, and it's one of the best examples of how you can take superhero tropes and make them feel completely fresh again. Black Hammer is really the brainchild of Jeff Lemire, with the visuals mainly handled by Dean Ormston and colored by Dave Stewart, who's basically a legend in coloring comics. Together, they created this book that feels both familiar and strange, nostalgic and new at the same time. Let's start with Jeff Lemire, the writer. He's Canadian, and before Black Hammer, he was already pretty well known in the comic industry. He first broke out with indie, more personal works like Essex County, which was heavily based on his own upbringing in small-town Ontario. That book put him on the map as a writer who really understood small communities, loneliness, and human emotion, things that ended up defining Black Hammer. After that, he worked with both of the big publishers. At DC, he wrote Animal Man and Green Arrow. At Marvel, he wrote Old Man Logan and Moon Knight. Readers have always said the same thing about him. He has a unique ability to mix big, crazy ideas with deep emotional cores. He doesn't just write about superheroes punching villains, he writes about people who happen to be superheroes, with all their insecurities and flaws laid bare. What made him go into this field? Lemire originally wanted to be a filmmaker, but he realized comics were the perfect medium for him because he could tell stories visually and emotionally without needing a whole crew or budget. He's said in interviews that comics gave him a way to combine his love of storytelling with his artistic side, and when you read his work, you can tell he's obsessed with exploring human relationships more than spectacle. That's why Black Hammer works so well at superheroes, but filtered through his small-town, melancholic lens. Then you've got Dean Ormston, the main artist for the series. His style is not what you'd call mainstream superhero at all. He doesn't draw shiny muscles or sleek cityscapes like Jim Lee or Ivan Reis. His work is rough, almost sketchy, with this slightly gothic, eerie vibe. At first, some readers even found it off-putting because it's not what they were used to in superhero comics. But that's actually what made Black Hammer stand out. His style makes the farm and the town feel claustrophobic and off-kilter, while the flashbacks to their superhero days look larger than life, but still carry this sense of unease. Ormston had been around the industry before Black Hammer, mostly doing stuff for 2000 AD in the UK, but this book is what really cemented him with a new wave of fans. The third pillar is Dave Stewart, the colorist. If you're into comics, you know Stewart is one of the best in the business. He's worked on Hellboy, BPRD, and a ton of other major titles. His coloring on Black Hammer is perfect muted, earthy tones for the small town, and brighter nostalgic palettes for the flashbacks. He helps sell that duality of normal life versus superhero life. Stewart's reputation is flawless. Fans trust that if he's on a book, the atmosphere will be spot on. As for editing, Lemire had a long relationship with Dark Horse Comics, which is the publisher of Black Hammer. Dark Horse gave him a lot of freedom to build out his own superhero universe, the way Marvel and DC let creators do, back in the Golden and Silver Age. That's why Black Hammer feels so personal and consistent. It's not being messed with by corporate demands the way mainstream superhero books often are. At the end of the day, Lemire, Ormston, and Stewart all came into comics for different reasons. But they share one thing. They wanted to tell stories you couldn't really tell in other mediums. Together, their collaboration made Black Hammer what it is. A modern classic that feels like both a tribute to superhero comics and a critique of them. When Black Hammer first came out, the fandom didn't quite know what to expect. Some people saw the previews and thought it was just going to be another Watchmen-style deconstruction of superheroes, something we've seen plenty of times before. But as readers actually dug into it, the reactions became a lot more complex and, in most cases, a lot more positive. What really caught people off guard was how emotional the book was. Fans thought they'd get a straight-up superhero parody or a quirky indie take on Justice League archetypes. Instead, what they got were characters who felt broken, vulnerable, and in many cases, painfully relatable. A lot of readers praised how Jeff Lemire took familiar superhero ideas, like the alien outsider, the cosmic explorer, or the magical hero, and instead of focusing on their flashy battles, he focused on their inner lives. Golden Gale was the perfect example. The idea of a middle-aged woman trapped in the body of a child hit readers hard. People laughed at the dark humor of this foul-mouthed 9-year-old chain-smoking in a diner. But the tragedy behind it stuck with them. Fans said Gale's story was one of the most original and gut-punching twists on the superhero formula they'd ever seen. And then there was Barbalian, the alien warrior whose story wasn't about conquering worlds but about being exiled for who he loved. That struck a chord with LGBTQ+ readers especially, many of whom said Barbalian's arc made them feel seen, in a genre that usually hides behind capes and costumes. Beyond the characters, the mystery of the town pulled the fandom in almost immediately. From the very first issue, people were theorizing online about why these heroes were trapped, who or what was keeping them there, and how it tied back to Black Hammer's death. It was like watching fans put together puzzle pieces in real time. The conversations weren't just about powers or costumes. They were about isolation, sacrifice, and the meaning of being a hero when the world doesn't even remember your name. That sense of mystery and existential dread kept people hooked issue after issue. Another thing fans really loved was the nostalgia baked into the book. Longtime comic readers could see the fingerprints of comic history all over the place. Lemire clearly respects the old-school superhero traditions. You can feel echoes of Superman, Captain Marvel, the Justice League, and the Avengers in these characters, but instead of just copying them, he twisted them into something fresh. Fans described it as both a tribute and a critique. On one hand, you could enjoy it as a love letter to the silver and golden age of comics. On the other hand, you could see it as Lemire asking the hard question: what happens when those larger-than-life myths fade into obscurity? Now, not everything was love at first sight. The fandom had its share of criticisms, and they weren't shy about voicing them. One of the biggest sticking points was the pacing. Some readers came in expecting non-stop superhero action, the kind of high-octane stuff Marvel and DC usually deliver. What they got instead were long stretches of small-town life, awkward dinners, people fixing barns, and characters wrestling with depression and regret. For fans who wanted a fight on every page, The book felt slow and even frustrating. There were plenty of posts online where people admitted they dropped the series early because they thought it was too much talking and not enough action. Dean Ormston's style isn't sleek or traditionally superhero. It's rough, uneven, almost distorted at times. At first, a lot of readers didn't like it. Some flat out said the art looked ugly compared to the polished, glossy superhero books they were used to. But interestingly, as the story went on, many of those same readers started to change their minds. They realized the slightly warped look of the characters and the muted tones of the town fit the unsettling vibe of the story perfectly. What felt jarring at the start became part of the atmosphere, and eventually, fans began praising the art for making the farm feel claustrophobic and strange. Still, there's a segment of the fandom that never warmed to it, and they'll tell you straight up they love the writing but just can't get behind the visuals. Another mixed reaction came when the spin-offs started rolling out. At first, fans were thrilled. Books like Sherlock Frankenstein and Dr. Starr expanded the world and gave depth to characters and villains who didn't get much spotlight in the main series. People were excited to see this wasn't just a one-off story. Lemire was building an entire superhero universe under Dark Horse, something fans compared to a more heartfelt, indie version of DC or Marvel. But as more and more spin-offs came out, some readers began to feel overwhelmed. They complained that the story was branching out too much, that you needed to buy too many books to keep track of everything, and that the main storyline was being stretched thin. A few even accused Dark Horse of milking the property, worried that the unique, intimate story was getting buried under too much expansion. And then, there's the inevitable comparison to Watchmen. Anytime a comic deconstructs superheroes, fans drag out the Watchmen comparison, and Black Hammer was no exception. Some critics and fans felt the book wasn't doing anything Alan Moore hadn't already done decades earlier. They called it another group of sad superheroes sitting around. And while most readers disagreed with that take, it did start a conversation about whether Black Hammer was truly groundbreaking or just a really good remix of old ideas. Finally, the way the main mystery resolves divided the fandom. For some readers, the reveal about why the heroes were trapped and what really happened with Black Hammer was satisfying, emotional, and exactly what they wanted. For others, it felt like a letdown after such a long build-up. They said the ending was too predictable, or that once the central mystery was solved, the series lost some of its magic. You can still see arguments about this online, with fans split between calling it one of the best modern endings in superhero comics and others saying it fizzled out. So, to sum up the fandom reaction, Black Hammer built itself a loyal fan base who see it as one of the best modern takes on superheroes, a series that combines nostalgia with real human depth. They loved the emotional weight, the mystery, and the expanded universe. But at the same time, they didn't shy away from pointing out the flaws, the slow pacing, the divisive art style, the sheer number of spin-offs, and an ending that didn't land for everyone. In the end, what's clear is that Black Hammer isn't a comic that leaves people indifferent. Fans either connect deeply with it and call it a masterpiece, or they bounce off it because it's not delivering the action or polish they're used to. And that's probably why it's lasted, because love it or not. It gave readers something to talk about, argue over, and think about long after they closed the book. What I love the most about Black Hammer is how Jeff Lemire, along with artist Dean Ormston, didn't just throw together another superhero book to ride the wave of Marvel and DC's big names. They built something that feels personal and layered. Lemire writes these characters like they're not just costumes or archetypes, but fully realized people with scars, insecurities, and real emotions that stick with you. Take Abraham Slam, for example. He's this old-school Golden Age-style hero. But what makes him interesting isn't just the throwback vibe. It's watching him wrestle with aging and relevance, asking himself if the world even needs him anymore. Or look at Colonel Weird, this cosmic adventurer who seems larger than life, but underneath all the space travel and multiverse stuff, he's clearly broken by trauma and isolation. And then you've got Golden Gale, trapped in the body of a child while her mind ages like everyone else. Imagine the bitterness and sadness of living that contradiction every day. That's the genius of Lemire and Ormston. They're showing us superheroes not as untouchable gods, but as living, breathing beings weighed down by struggles that mirror our own. They're heroes, yeah, But there are also people trying to cope with identity, loss, and the haunting feeling of being trapped in a life they didn't fully choose. And the art supports it beautifully. It's gritty, textured, almost nostalgic, which makes the story feel timeless and intimate at the same time. That's why Black Hammer isn't just another cape comic. It's a reminder that beneath the masks and powers, there's a human core. And honestly, that makes it more powerful than half the flashy, empty event books we get from the big two these days. Relationship between the readers and the creative team. One of the biggest reasons Black Hammer has managed to build such a loyal following is because Jeff Lemire and the creative team don't treat it like just another product on the shelf. They actually listen. Lemire is known for being a pretty down-to-earth guy. He's not one of those creators who hides in a tower and ignores the outside world. He engages with readers at conventions, interviews, and through little updates online, and you can tell he actually takes note of what people are responding to. If fans are deeply attached to a side character, there's a good chance you'll see that character fleshed out in a spin-off or one-shot down the line. That's how we got stuff like Sherlock Frankenstein and Dr. Starr. Both of those came from the audience, showing strong interest in corners of the Black Hammer universe that could have easily been left as background details. It's not that Lemire bends to every whim of the fandom. He's never been the type to let loud complaints dictate his whole story. Instead, he finds this balance. He listens closely, he notices what resonates, but he never lets it pull him off course from the big picture he's crafting. That's part of why the series still feels like it has a strong backbone instead of just becoming fan service. Fans can tell when a writer is pandering, and Lemire avoids that trap. As for how much they care, the proof is in the storytelling itself. Every spin-off, every miniseries, every extra issue feels like it was made because the creators genuinely wanted to explore those characters more, not just to cash in. They've expanded the world in ways that give the fans more of what they love, but they've kept it consistent and meaningful. Dean Ormston's art style, for example, was never replaced with something more mainstream to sell more copies, even though the jagged, moody look isn't everyone's taste. That's because they cared more about staying true to the tone of the story than trying to chase quick popularity. The fandom notices things like that. When readers see a book staying loyal to its own identity and not selling out, it builds trust. And trust is what keeps people coming back month after month. You don't hear Black Hammer fans saying, "They ruined it after issue 20," or "They don't care what we think." Instead, you hear people saying the series grew with them, that the spin-offs added layers, and that Lemire respected the readers enough to give them a world that felt alive and worth investing in. In short, the Black Hammer team has earned a reputation for respecting their readers. They don't treat fandom like noise in the background. They treat them like the reason this universe even exists. Not by caving to every demand, but by paying attention, expanding the world in ways fans want to see, and staying true to the spirit of what made people fall in love with it in the first place. That's why fans stuck with it, why the universe kept growing, and why Black Hammer has become one of the most celebrated indie superhero books of its time. Alright, time to wrap this up. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps with this weird algorithm we're stuck with. And don't hold back, drop your honest thoughts on Black Hammer in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. I'll keep bringing you more fresh, quality content, so until next time, take care and farewell.